going on in the subsurface. So if you have, this is your surface, it's pretty flat. You have almost no soil, okay? About 1 meter beneath the surface of rock, there's a layer. And that layer can be up to 60 feet thick. That can be your freshwater land. So Andros is much thicker because it's a larger island. Well, it may not be so thick anymore because Nassau has been overpumping by 4 billion gallons a day, so that's disappeared. But originally, it was about 60 meters thick. The one in Lucaya, here on this island, on the east end, is about 60 meters thick. Okay? Underneath it is the seawater. So this is the opening, the seawater comes in, and as it moves underneath this layer, seawater is much more dense. Do you understand dense? It's full of salt, so it's much more dense. It has a heavier weight to it than fresh water. Okay? So the fresh water, rainwater percolates through the ground, and because this is such a quiet environment, this incredible phenomenon, and we are lucky we have it, because without it, we wouldn't have any fresh water out here. The water actually very gently lays down on top of the seawater. Now, I just told you that the seawater moves. So what I see when I'm in this layer, having a drink, and it is so good. When I'm looking down, what I see as the green water passes, I'm just going to do a little snapshot here, I see swirls. And the reason I see those swirls is because when you take a mass, like the seawater, and you move it underneath a stationary mass, you get a little friction. And that friction creates a little bit of turbulence. How many of you have heard that term, mixing zone? Okay. That's what that is. Sometimes that mixing zone, depending on how rapidly the water is moving in, will widen, or it'll be very, very thin. So as I travel, I've literally been to the interior middle of this island. When I travel in deeper into the island, that mixing zone gets very, very thin, because the edges of the island are where the initial portals are for all the water to come in. And as I move into the interior, it's moving very far away from that entrance. So the mixing zone gets down to literally a line on the wall. It's the only way I see it. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions on that? Did I answer your question? No, you're confused. Okay. Well, you know that salt water has, if you take fresh water and you dissolve salt in it, then you change the density of it. It actually is heavier. Salt makes, when you talk about density, you're talking about heavy. You know what a piece of lead weighs? Lead weighs a lot, doesn't it? Have you had a piece of lead in your hand? Like a diver's weight belt? For a little piece of lead, it's very, very heavy. It's very dense. If you put that on the water, it'll drop to the bottom, right? Okay? Seawater has a lot of salt in it, so it's much more dense than fresh water. Fresh water is lighter than seawater, so it cannot fall through the seawater. So it sits on top. Okay? Does that help? It is that layer that is very important to your quality of life here. You are entitled, by law, as human beings, to have fresh drinking water. I would say edible food, but the government's not responsible for feeding you, but you should be entitled to the ability to get edible food. Edible meaning it's safe to eat. And you are entitled to breathable air. That's the law. I always like to call it natural law. But you are entitled by your Constitution to that. I think we have a problem. And I don't think that's been taken into account. It's very easy for people to come in here who break your land up from underneath you. They have passports that takes them out of this country. They don't have to live here. And I can guarantee you that the people that end up in Marietta, they don't have houses next to the blast. I'm sure they're somewhere else. Okay? East.
No, that's a big blast.
Yeah, I know Fortune. So it's very easy for these people to come in and do these kind of strikes. And you know, I want to make it very clear, I'm not opposed to development. I want you guys to have a vibrant economy. You are all entitled to make a living, but it's kind of a wasted point when somebody's grinding up your home, your island, which sits at sea level, and then you bring home a little tiny paycheck. I'm not quite clear. Maybe I'm not very smart. I don't get that, but it doesn't make sense to me. Okay. All right. Any questions on this? Yes.
I got a question. Could you guys give this information our government to let them know exactly what's going on?
The world, over 500 copies of this book. They have a copy. I sent it to all the necessary groups. And I can guarantee you that it never ends. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and finish this up and then we'll open up for questions, okay? I don't want to get everybody riled. I do want to rile you up, but not like this. Alright. Chapter in my book, which is available, tells your story. The chapter's called The Silent Death. Now, obviously when you write something like this, you're open to all opinions. I was told that I was just a female, hyperactive, hypersensitive cave diver. Thank you. And I figured at this point I needed to have a law degree so that I would have, as a cave diver, very sharp teeth. So it improved my sense of humor, big time. All right, I want to read something to you if you don't mind. I'm going off the first paragraph here, but I just want to say here, unfortunately, what I'm about to divulge in these next few pages is not a happy story about conservation and preservation of these blue water-filled corridors. What I call the underground mountains and canyons of the Bahamas. Did you know you have mountains and canyons in the Bahamas? They are gobsmackingly gorgeous. These pages will not tell you all the wonderful scientific discoveries which could prove a possible cure for cancers and other mammalian animals, nor will it offer up clues to life forms that exist long before humans wandered the earth. No, the words you are about to read tell of a destructive force that is invading the underworld of caves from the surface like a cancer, silent and deadly. I broke these apart because unfortunately all the islands have some problems, but I took Grand Bahama as number one because it had the most. Massive cave systems on the west end of Mount Bahama have been destroyed by a developer specifically, besides Mount Marietta doing the digging, by Hutchinson Wongpa Limited, HWL, which is what I refer to from here on, a company out of Hong Kong. They did this by breaking up the caves through dredging, and in some cases unsuccessfully trying to fill in caves with concrete and other rubble. Based on the Cavity Detection Survey number MS-FP Freeport 004 generated by Microsearch Limited out of Chester, United Kingdom, it was concluded that conservatively only 32% of the area to be developed was inundated with water-filled caves, with a possible addition of 1,500 tons of missing rock beneath these gravity anomalies. Based on my diving experience on the island, and by the way, no one from the government has ever asked me for my opinion, because they knew full on, and I was told this, they wouldn't like my answer. I lived here for 5 years, and no one, they brought in all their world experts, and no one ever asked me a single thing. I've been doing this for 27 years. I lost 2 friends. One of them was my husband. It's a dangerous activity. Anyway, my estimation, or based on my diving experience on the island, a value greater than 50% would have been more correct. Confirmation of my estimate, these systems were much more extensive, was proven when 2 cave divers, while I was living on the island, 2 cave divers from the US were brought out here into the caves. One died, because caves in the Bahamas are probably one of the most dangerous ones in the world. They're not Florida caves. 2 guys went in, one came out, the other one came out on the north side of the island. I'm really sorry for that. You make your own decisions. The body washed out on the cave system way on the north side of the island from the starting point on the south. On Marietta, publicly, the existence of these caves was denied, and even today they still deny it. This is another company that HWL, with the expansion of the container port by mining the limestone and selling the rocks, and this is where they had a 2007 profit of over $15 billion. Bahamas are experiencing what it's like to live in California with its earthquakes without being there. The blasting is damaging the horn, and further disruption of freshwater supply is occurring. Again, Mount Marietta is claiming there are no caves. And they have the report. I had a mole, and I'm going to admit it, I had a mole that was working when the container port was starting up, and he brought me rock samples, he brought me copies of documents. He's no longer here, so there's no need to pursue him. But I got those documents, and I made copies, and I sent them to the relevant people. So they are there. So this is where I feel a little bit of angst when we bring in all these hypothetical experts that come in and they make these reviews. They do a hit and run. I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but this is what I've experienced since I lived here and have gone away and stayed in contact with Gail, that these companies are not qualified to make a proper assessment unless they're prepared to tell me that my 27 years of work here was for naught. All right. Current conditions on Grand Bahama. As of August 2008, almost all the Bahamian pines are dead. When I flew over today, or yesterday, there are no living trees. They're just stumps. Now that, for anybody who knows anything about environmental science, knows that suggests there's no fresh water. They were there. The big, tall trunks are there. So there was fresh water once. It's not there anymore. It's always an indicator when I'm flying over a lot of these islands. I can tell you where there's fresh water and where there isn't. And there ain't no fresh water here. Mr. Laika Shane, who was the bigwig for HWL, in his arrogance, wrote in his website, "It is my belief that increasing pressure to maximize profit and efficiency should not compromise our respect for equality and our determination to minimize misery." The strength of a nation and its people depend on education and medical care. These are the country's roots, and like a tree, the deeper its roots, the more flourishing its branches and foliage. Well, I found that rather distracting. Based on those worthless and meaningless words, if you have an education and medical care, you don't need fresh water, or for that matter, your environment. Just get education. The real tragedy is that it was possible to develop the container port responsibly, but HWL was not interested. According to their very nice project leader, who happened to be Australian, he understood where I was coming from, and he said to me that there was nothing he could do. He was ordered to do the development one way and only one way. I gave them an offer on how to do it without destroying anything. Of course, at that point, Bahama Rock would not have been getting the benefits of mining out the container port. The practice of the United States in particular to allow the dirty industry to leave its strictly environmental regulated borders and to set up their operation outside the United States is taking a devastating toll on the environmental health of those host countries, which opens their border to this form of industry, attracted by the lure of easy money for a few high government officials, and mostly service jobs for the general population. The relationship is nurtured by these companies who are seeking countries with limited ability and interest in enforcing the few environmental policies they have, and who don't look too deeply into their operations. A few of the companies that have been in operation in Grand Bahama for nearly 45 years have been allowed to pollute unchecked the environment surrounding the industrial site, including the groundwater that lies only a meter below the surface. The Bahama government knows that chemical and pharmaceutical companies import nasty chemicals, but they also know that there's no formal protocol to transport chemical waste off the island or to deal with it in any responsible way. In other words, there is no accountability. Questions have been presented, certainly not publicly, with the intent of determining what was being done with the waste, and a few residents who were unfortunate to live in the proximity of the industrial site know exactly what happened. It was buried in some 55-gallon drums. This was a phone call I got when I was still living here at 4 in the morning. The person was very afraid. and told me in a whisper, I'm watching these people digging up the rock and dumping 55-gallon drums. So of course, where that stuff is, it's sitting in your fresh water. Grade schools in the area have been closed on more than one occasion because different chemicals mix in the subsurface, generating a nasty cocktail of gases that seep through the ground in the school building, causing dermal burns and severe eye irritation. Children were reported running from the building, crying in pain and fright. Was anything done? No. The event was reported in the local newspaper only once, and then nothing. I find this most disturbing because according to the Bahamians, their children are their most important asset they have, and yet it seems to be okay to poison them and their future for a few minor jobs. I go on. It's brutal reading, and it has been nothing in here that I've written has not been backed up by facts. I've got it. Most of these things I've been told when I was flying off the island. Jack Hayward, his partner, was sitting next to me, and I started telling her about some of the stuff that was going on where the polystyrene company was having drivers go around the island to blow out the dry waste. The vehicle, his instructions were drive around the island till the back's empty. And she looked at me and she said, I know. And I looked back at her, I didn't know who she was. And I said, what do you mean you know? Oh no, I've talked to Jack about it, and he told me, honey, don't worry about it. It's not your problem.